Now, listeners, you might be wondering why we haven't been talking about bourbon lately. And I'm here to tell you it's because I think we've been priced out of the market. I was just at Liquor Mountain the other day, which is like a local booze store here in Japan. Liquor Mountain. Wouldn't it be great to live on Liquor Mountain? Wow. And man, I was looking at these prices. I'm like, well, I think it's water for me for a while. So our health conscious listeners will be happy to know that I've got a glass of water with me tonight and have had for some time.
If there's any bourbon distillers out there who want to make us a special adult music single barrel batch, that would be great.
Yeah, we're back to Wild Turkey. Wild Turkey 101. Maybe I shouldn't have said that because now they're going to take that away.
Anyway, you're listening to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind and bourbon too.
Yeah.
Cognac and other fine things.
I'm a big fan of the nice cognac. I like that.
And we're bringing you 6 albums every week, usually in classical and jazz music. Sometimes we venture into other related realms. And before we get going into episode 190, I want to give out a few thanks for last week's episode. Thanks to the musicians who shared our episode. That would be harpsichordist Corina Marti. We featured her album Sea Interludes, keyboard music from Baltic tablatures around 1600. And also on the jazz side, trumpeter Carl Olanderson. And also one of his followers shared the episode as well. His recording was called Hurry Up and Wait. Some really fine trumpet playing and great jazz on there. So if you haven't checked out last week's episode, go back and listen to that and check out those recordings. As usual for tonight's episode, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all of the music that we'll discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. Now, wherever you listen to us, if you can't see the full description, recording list, or the links are hard to follow on your app, please check us out on our host site, Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend or musician friends. That helps us grow our audience. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the podcast music category recommendations. That's another way we can get new listeners. You can come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. I put up a bunch as usual this week. You can leave a message or comment there as well. See our interaction with the artists. And we're up and running on X now too, Mike.
Oh, fantastic. Have we posted anything yet? Because I haven't. I don't even know how to use X. I've never been on X. I've just avoided it permanently. Twitter, all that stuff. Just like the Wild West out there.
I shared last week's episode and a few recordings on there. It's much better for our purposes, I think, than Instagram.
You can put links on there. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Maybe I'll put some YouTube videos up there when they come up.
Yeah, so if we've got anybody who likes to use X and you want to get new album releases and find out when we have our new episodes, you can find us on there. I think we're called Adult Music Pod, one word over there. I'll be building that up as I get used to it.
Yeah, I'll have to visit it. I haven't actually been on it yet. I guess I'm going to have to learn how to use X. Here we go.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
And otherwise, if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We play music samples as we discuss these releases. And here is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. We also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And we're going south tonight, Mike.
We are going south of the border, south of the U.S. border, for all the classical recordings anyway. Now, for this first recording, I just want to tell listeners, if you enjoyed my pronunciation of Polish names last week for Corina Marti's album Sea Interludes, you're going to love my pronunciation of the names of these pieces. On this album of 16th century music from Guatemala, this is called the Huehuetenango Songbook. I have no idea how that's pronounced. That's what I'm seeing, so I'm saying it that way. Music from 16th century Guatemala. It's spelled Huehue, Tenango. The performers are Jonatan Alvarado on tenor and Ariel Abramovich on the vihuela, which is a gentle sort of plucked sort of lute-like instrument, but it's a lot lighter sounding than the lute, and I really enjoyed listening to it. He plays the vihuela in G and A. There are two different ones. And this is on the Glossa label, released on October 18th. Man, it's already November 24th.
Wow.
When we record this, this record's already a month old. That's not old for classical music. I'm still listening to things from the 80s. Anyway, first of all, I want to say thank you to Jonatan Alvarado, the tenor on this album, for sending me a digital booklet with notes on the program. This is one of those releases where I couldn't give a coherent breakdown of the album without the background information, because this is all new to me.
Right.
Much like Sea Interludes was last week, so I'm in the same sort of situation again this week. So the story goes with this album that in 1932, the American anthropologist and novelist Oliver Lafarge published Santa Eulalia, the religion of a, here's another word, Cuchimatan Indian town in Guatemala, a book which detailed various aspects of the cultural and musical life of the inhabitants of Santa Eulalia, a remote town in the department of Huehuetenango in northwestern Guatemala. Then, in 1963, 31 years later, a collection of musical manuscripts was assembled in this Guatemalan town. The volumes originated from 3 small indigenous towns in the Chuchimatanes mountain range. The booklet note goes into much more detail about the volumes, so I'll refer interested listeners to that. The musical collection of Huehuetenango is the result of several interruptions. European colonization interrupted the history of native communities, while the original artistic production interrupted the European monopoly in Renaissance musical history. Over time, the missionary activity of these doctrines was also interrupted, forever changing the place and function of these manuscripts. And this is an interesting way to describe it, because you wind up with something, I guess you could say polyglot, that's really a mix of everything. I mean, this is what we have in the United States, too, in a way. The music on this album is largely based on the transcriptions of the 2 musicians we hear on it. It focuses on works with Latin texts and arranges them for voice and vihuela, an ensemble characteristic of the 16th century and not previously used in the interpretation of this Guatemalan repertoire. So the program we're going to hear on this CD is structured in 3 imaginary sections with titles that mimic the style of vihuela and voice publications released in Spain between 1536 and 1576. Are you following this? Don't worry, it'll become clear when I start talking about the music. Many of those Spanish publications contain repertoire that corresponds with the Guatemalan manuscripts. The idea is to create an imaginary book for vihuela and voice in 3 parts, modern but historically plausible, combining in each section works taken from the actual manuscripts, listed alongside the title of each piece. The fragmentary nature of some works has required various degrees of adaptation, arrangement, and recreation of the original material. You can hear this in the very first track, as well as tracks 7 and 13. Okay, so these pieces are pretty much, you have this gigantic manuscript with loads of really short pieces in it, and our 2 artists here have assembled them into 3 sort of books, let's say.
Right.
Tracks 1 through 7 are the Primer Libro, or the first book, which includes parts of masses, magnificats, and prayers for the entrance and the end of the liturgical celebration, except that they're sung and accompanied by a vihuela, so it really doesn't sound like church music, as you will hear. Track 1 in this first book is called Virgen Madre de Dios, and the sound, given the forces and light sound of the vihuela, is very intimate. In fact, this entire album is very intimate sounding. Let's get it in our ears. This is track 1. All right, let's come out of it there. We just heard 2 phrases. Now, it sounds very European, really. You wouldn't know it was from Guatemala unless I told you. It comes across as almost as a popular song of the era, despite its religious text. It sounds like a lament in tone, but the text is a simple, sincere prayer to the Virgin Mary. Track 2, Introito Salve Sancta Parens, a Latin title. This opens with the solo vocal sounding a bit like the formulaic chant that opens parts of the mass texts due to its modal harmony. Alvarado has a light, steady tone that's enjoyable to listen to. And in fact, we're going to hear a lot of modes on this album, which really makes me like it. I'm a big fan of modal harmony. Track 3, Kyrie eleison. This is the Kyrie section of the Mass. So the vihuela returns an accompaniment here. Again, we have a feeling of sacred text meeting secular melody and accompaniment for this opening setting of the Mass. Let's sample it. And there's going to be more after that. The setting of the sections of the text don't change much. It's very simple and goes straight to the heart as a result. Track 4, Pleni sunt, de la missa sin nomine. Here the vihuela gets a solo spot. The opening is spacious with individual notes allowed to decay. The overall sound is gentle, and having the solo vocal in track 2 and solo instrumental here does a lot to vary the sound of the program. The piece itself is gentle and attractive. Now I'll be sampling the solo movements in these books later on in the program, so let's go on to track 5 for now. Track 5, Antiphons ad Magnificat Gloriose Virginis. There's a bit of a dipping rhythm to this. It's got religious sounding modal harmony, and this is a solo vocal, so let's hear Alvarado's solo work here.
Gloriose Virginis Mariae conceptionem dignissimam recollamus.
Now these samples have to be short simply because all of these movements are so short that I don't really want to play the entire movement. Anyway, on to track 6, Magnificat, how would you say this? Otto toni, or 8 toni. This track starts right after the other, and it seems connected due to the opening solo vocal. The vihuela comes in, accompanying with lightly plucked chords. The quia respexit part of the text is practically chanted solo by Alvarado. This is the longest setting of the section at over 6 minutes. Most of the rest are 1 or 2 minutes long. Alvarado's solemn tone is attractive in this music. There are brief moments of melisma on vowel sounds that grabbed me in this track. I really liked the concluding Amen, so I'd like to sample that. Let's go to the end of the track, about the 6-minute mark. So this has a very European sound, but there is, in the shaping of the melody, you get a bit of the New World in there. Track 7, Benedicamus Domino and Deo Gratias. The title is the entire sung text. This unfolds much like the previous Magnificat and could be a continuation. Some of the melisma on the word Deo goes into some intriguing key areas, and the vihuela stands out here for some of its descending chordal lines. Tracks 8 through 13 are the Segundo Libro, the second book of compositions that our two artists have assembled here. This presents a selection of anonymous 4-voice motets to which text has been added that is not found in the source. So track 8, Paratum Cor Meum. This is originally a composition by Claudine de Sermisi, Le Content est riche. It's a contrafactum, or in jazz you'd call this a contrafact, which is a substitution of one text for another without big changes to the music. Le Content est riche is a very popular Parisian chanson by Sermisi, and the vihuela accompaniment by Abramovich here is very austere. The timbre of Alvarado's voice takes center stage as the song has a lot of sustained tones. Alvarado has a solid tone with a hint of sweetness at its center, and that's what makes this so appealing. Let's hear a little bit of it. Track 9, Pater Noster, the Our Father. A gentle vihuela opening ushers in a quieter, more subdued tone from Alvarado here. Let's hear this from the opening. Listening to this, I really think the vihuela is an instrument that needs to come back. I think our world really needs it because it's so gentle. It's like the exact opposite of what we usually get from music these days.
Yeah, it's very calming.
Yeah, I found the same thing. I also enjoy Alvarado's way with melisma in his vowel sounds, and you hear a lot of it in this particular track. The melisma here, though, isn't as ornate as it is in Italian works, but still it's there, and it was really enjoyable. Track 10, Hic Solus, Dolores Nostros. This is not much different in pacing and approach than the previous work, but equally as appealing. Again, Alvarado's light vocal tone and timbre guide us through the piece with its characteristic intimacy. And I hope we're getting a sense of the intimacy of this album by now. It really does have that sort of quiet room, intimate tone to it. Track 11, Agnus Dei. This is from Cristobal de Morales' Mass, Misa la Casa. This is an instrumental for vihuela on the melody from the Morales Mass. I haven't sampled the solo vihuela yet. It's a quiet, intimate instrument, so you'll need a quiet space for this. And again, very much what we need in our constantly speeding up and anxiety-ridden world. Let's listen to a bit of this. Very pretty, very intimate. Abramovich is a sensitive player. Track 12, O Bone Jesu, a composition by Juan de Anchieta. It has stronger, thicker chords from Abramovich on the vihuela, accompanying Alvarado. Alvarado starts in his lower range, and this comes as an appealing surprise as the tone is even and intimate in that range as well. Let's hear a bit of that.
O bone Jesu,
By the middle, Alvarado is in his sweeter mid to upper range and gives a lyrical performance. Just before the end, at the 2-minute mark, the vihuela starts a livelier rhythm momentarily, which takes us to the final chord. Track 13, Cananea. This is also a contrafactum, I believe, by a piece by Pedro de Escobar, Clamabat auta mulier Cananea. The tempo of all of the pieces on this album have been relatively the same, and the text here is about the Canaanite woman who asks Jesus to help her daughter expel a demon. Alvarado has a lyrical approach to the melody, and once again, the performance has an appealing intimacy. All of the pieces have been like this, and it's rather satisfying to be bathing oneself in such gentle tones. But at this point, I'm feeling like it'd be nice to have some contrast with a more up-tempo rhythm. Now, some are coming soon, so sit tight. There are noticeable differences between compositions, but they're all subtle, and one must become attuned to the overall gentle tone of the album to notice them. So I think listening to this album could sort of make us a little bit more sensitive to nuance. Now, tracks 14 through 19, the Tercer Libro, or the third book, compiles various works in vernacular languages, some of which are contrafacta of recently identified European works. And here, the album is going to take on a little bit of a more rhythmic tone, and I was really happy to hear that at this point. Track 14 is called Salamanca, a contrafact on Pierre Molu's Ami Souffré, or possibly by Sermisi. This is played solo by the vihuela. It's pretty, and is a good example of the gentle appeal of the vihuela. Let's listen to a little bit of it. Track 15, Edmini, another contrafact on Sebastiano Festa's Amore che mi tormenti. Suddenly here, we're in the realm of secular song. The text here is about the torments of love, as the title states. It finds Alvarado in his lower range for a good deal of the verse. He's got an Italianate tone down there. His overall tone and approach remind me a bit of Marco Beasley, who kind of sings popular Italian songs of the past, of the distant past. Anyway, let's hear the end of this track. I do like that very last sustained note that Alvarado sings. Track 16, Con que la lavaré, a contrafact on Juan Vasquez's Moraleos. It's a Spanish text using the metaphor of washing one's face, and it states that others use water to wash their faces, while the singer washes himself with anxiety and passion. He could be living in 2024. The tune is spaciously plucked by Abramovich on the vihuela, with long-sustained longing tones from Alvarado. There's a light, despondent character to the performance. And then track 17, I was waiting to get to this, Mulier que ploras. This is a contrafact on Juan Vasquez's composition, Pues mis amores en Fernandino. The song has a lively rhythm. This is the first one we've heard on the album. Let's hear it.
Pues mis amores en Fernandino. Ay, que era casado, mal me ha mentido. fracassado mal me ha mentido. Digas marinero del cuerpo garrido, digas marinero del cuerpo garrido, en cuál de aquellas naves.
All right, so we're actually moving a little bit there. The narrator is a woman in this piece who has given her love to a sailor named Fernandillo, who she later finds is married. It sounds rather happy, but perhaps the energy of the rhythm is comedic. Track 18 is a romance, De Antequera Sale el Moro. It's a contrafact on that song. I'm attracted to the lyrical, light Italianate phrasing and tone of Alvarado here. The story is a bit mythical, telling of a knight asking for help via letters written in blood. We don't learn what he needs help with in the text, though. The melody and overall performance is touching. Track 19, the final track, Dame acogida en tu hato. Here the singer asks a shepherd for shelter in his hut from the storm outside, but is turned away. It's rather a downer to end on, so I'm going to leave us with that sample from track 17 as the last thing we hear. Though the tune itself here is lyrical and again highly appealing, with Alvarado's sweetness of tone and attractive phrasing adding to the appeal. So the compositions on this album could be performed in a variety of ways, and the intimate, prayerful, gentle approach taken by this album shows them all in an attractive light. Having such an austere approach lets the melodies stand on their own, and we recognize they're all direct and appealing. The album comes across as meditative and intimate, a 48-minute caress of the ear with gentle sounds from Abramovich's subtly toned vihuela and Alvarado's light tenor and popular song-like tone. Though the tone of the vihuela doesn't change from track to track, to my ear it's such an appealing, gentle, intimate sound that I was happy to hear it all the way through the album. Now this album sort of fills in a historical gap for us, like music from Guatemala, but you can enjoy this very easily on a very superficial level, just letting it play. It's just so soothing and relaxing and intimate, it can really take a lot of stress away at that level. But of course, you can also do a deep dive. The booklet really gives you a lot of information on the music on this album. At 48 minutes, the album may seem short for a classical album, but I'd say it's just enough. If it were any longer, I think it would require some contrast in tempo and probably instrumentation too. All of the tracks are slow and meditative except for the one comic song on track 17. And it would have been nice to have a few tracks that were more upbeat to provide some contrast. But I guess that's the nature of the music collected in the Huehuetenango Songbook. The performances sustain interest throughout, mostly due to the surface beauty of the sound this duo makes together. I'd advise listeners to pause between books. In this case, there are 3 books on the recording, so you can approach each set of works with fresh ears.
It's music from a time and place that's hard to fully contemplate, although the booklet notes help to give you a context for the material. That said, it's very easy to enjoy. In performance, the pieces have an endearing sparseness and honesty. Alvarado's tenor voice conveys the material very earnestly, and Abramovich's vihuela is very captivating and calming. It can definitely tell the European origins, but there's something else interesting in the mix. And then there's the special nuances of this very intimate type of performance. I really enjoyed it. It's going to calm you down and give you something interesting to fill your ears with.
All right. Our second album is 20th century Brazilian solo piano music. This is performed by Diego Caetano, who is a Brazilian-American pianist. And it's on one of our favorite new labels, Da Vinci Classics, new to us anyway. Thank you to Yumi again for sending me not only the booklet, but some high-class sound files. So this sounds a lot better than streaming. This was released on November 1st. First of all, the album has beautiful cover art. It's got this green sort of image of this woman, I guess with the sun behind her. Check it out. The booklet notes take the names of the composers as a theme. Many are named after the music or musicians their parents loved. For example, Radames Niatali is named after the character in Verdi's opera Aida, the Radames. And Guarnieri's first name was Mozart. He let that name drop and used his mother's maiden name as his first name, though. Imagine your parents call you Mozart, and now you got, and you're just not a good musician. It would just, be really humiliating. Brazil is a hybridized culture, and really like a lot of the Americas. It has roots coming from pre-Columbian natives, Portuguese, African, and recent European immigrant cultures, and now even Asians too, because it's a lot of Japanese moved there after the war, and they have like a big presence there as well. It makes the music of Brazil enthralling, but often hard to define. So the first track on this is a composer that I've really come to like a lot, although there aren't enough recordings of his music. I'd like to hear more. Radomir's Natali. Now that is an Italian name. Natali's roots are Italian, and like Bartók did for Hungary and its neighboring cultures, he studied and notated many traditional tunes and musical pieces from Brazil. The work he did became the foundation for his own quintessentially Brazilian musical language. Now this track is called Negociando, or Negotiating. It has an improvisational quality which intertwines with more structured sections based on Brazilian rhythms. Let's hear the opening first before I say anything about it. I really love that little hiccup in the rhythm that he does there. That really stands out. Now, that harmony and that rhythm is something you'll only hear in the 20th century. So this is it has a jazzy feel to it. And you can hear a lot of different influence. You hear a jazz influence, and you also hear sort of the Brazilian rhythms that were probably around Natali at the time. Caetano does very well putting across the feeling of improvisation for this work. I feel like the rhythm could have been more deeply etched, but he puts it across well. And again, like I said, that sort of rhythmic hiccup really becomes a characteristic of the piece. We're aware this is a Brazilian piece, and I really like the more jazzy improvisation sounding arpeggiated lines in the piece, which we heard at the beginning. They come back. The piece has a cool jazz-inspired ending, too. And in fact, that was my favorite piece on the album, I have to tell you right away. Anyway, but the rest are good, too. Tracks 2 through 4, Francisco Mignone lived 1887 to 1986. This is his Piano Sonata number 1. Mignone's parents were also Italians from Liguria. Mignone studied in Milan, and his education was deeply marked by his teacher's love for French music. And French music, of course, means harmonies and light timbres. Timbre is a big part of French music. This piano sonata was epoch-making when it was premiered in Rio de Janeiro. It became an exemplar of the new Brazilian musical spirit. So track 2 is the first movement, Moderato. The piece begins with rumbling, arpeggiated figures creating atmosphere. A theme is heard deep in the bass as the spray of arpeggiated figures continues in the right hand. At the 1-minute mark, a steady bass line appears and some virtuosic repeated notes are hammered out. This sounds like a pretty tough piece to play. Let's hear it from about the 1-minute mark. It kind of reminds me of something from West Side Story. One of the gang scenes or something. All of this builds into a film score-like chase theme, which is what we just heard. Song-like in its repetition. The machine-like rhythm goes until 2 minutes and 30 seconds when a new, gentler theme comes out with fountain spray-like figures in the left hand accompanying the melody high up in the right hand's range. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds, the repeated note theme is back. Sections just end and start up. There's no fading one into another. We also hear the hammered-out bass note theme with the arpeggios spray in the right hand return to the end of the movement. Track 3 is the second movement, Andantino, quasi allegretto, the slow movement. The opening is sparsely rhythmic. It features harsh barking chords with notes from them sustained to form a melody. I like this effect and wonder why it's not used more in piano composing. Listen to this, I'll say more about it in a minute. Okay, so what Mignone has done here is he's disguised the attack on the melody. So he's got these chords. The melody is part of the chord. The chords are staccato, and he'll just keep the melodic note held down so you don't actually hear its attack. It just sounds like it's sustaining, and I just really like the effect. I'd like to hear more of that in piano music. The piano really has been accepted as a percussive instrument these days. In the 19th century, composers tried to hide that fact by playing legato, and they had all these different techniques for doing that. Think Chopin. But this is a pretty interesting technique. We do hear the percussive nature of it, though, in the chords. At 1 minute and 3 seconds, a gentler theme is heard with a syncopated, dotted rhythm. The theme crescendos with heavy bass notes acting as a harmonic anchor. At the 2 minute and 47 second mark, the theme suddenly turns to a more mischievous, quick theme. This leads at 3 minutes and 3 seconds to a syncopated bass line with a melodic theme above. A theme in the mid-range with arpeggiated accompaniment in the right comes next. The movement ends inconclusively on an open chord, and then we go to track 4, the third and final movement of this work, marked moderato. The movement opens with a staccato figure with an appealing rhythmic profile. Let's hear it. The pattern ends at 1 minute and 6 seconds and turns into a straight scale pattern. The theme morphs quite a bit with some melodic flourishes on the way. It mostly goes its way with the staccato rhythm it started with. I rather like the melodically simple but rhythmically complex lines at the beginning of the third minute, which lead to a flourish that ends the piece. Tracks 5 through 7, Heitor Villa-Lobos. Oh, what would a recording of Brazilian classical music be without the music of Heitor Villa-Lobos, Brazil's most famous composer, and also probably Brazil's most prolific composer. He composed a gigantic amount of music in a lot of different styles. This is his Suite Florale W117. Track 5 is the first track, Idilio na rede, which means idyll in the hammock. This predictably has a rocking motion to it. It does seem to paint an idyllic picture. Let's hear it. By the first minute, the music has become more energetic and exciting, but it reaches a pause in the first minute, and we hear the opening theme again. There are a lot of interesting subtle changes of rhythmic material in the piece. It has a pretty jazz song on the piano type of ending. Track 6 is the second movement, Una camponesa cantadera, a singing peasant girl. It has a pretty pattern in the left hand with the right playing far from expected thematic material. some French Impressionism creeps into the harmony. And we go into a new episode there. Once the music reaches the peak of its crescendo just after the 1 minute mark, the music is the loudest we've heard on the album. But don't worry, there will be louder to come. This subsides by the 1 minute and 30-second mark and the opening theme is back. Track 7 is the third movement, Alegria na Horta, or Joy in the Garden. Some odd chord harmonies are heard in this fortissimo chord opening. The chords move quickly, then break up into the main part, with quick lines in the right hand over a steady country dance type of rhythm. Villalobos can be excessive, and I think we've got an example of dynamic excess here. There's more of that to come, too. Virtually the entire piece is played in the fortissimo range. Caetano has the piano rattling by the end, and if you really want to hear a sample of that, don't worry, there's more Villalobos to come, and I'll give you some later. Track 8, Camargo Guarnieri. This is the guy whose real first name is Mozart. Camargo is his mother's maiden name. He took that as his first name. Canção Sertaneja. Another example of musical nationalism here. The piece starts with an optimistic chord pattern with a syncopated placement of them. The theme is straightforward and played unharmonized. Let's hear it. Oh, I should clarify, when I say that the melody is played unharmonized, of course there's harmony underneath it in the rhythm, but what I mean is it's not played in thirds or sixths, it's just the melodic line. So you can sense the ethnic rhythm in this piece. It becomes strong and clear at times. The larger structure of the phrasing is deeply satisfying as the central section resolves. By 2 minutes and 52 seconds, we're hearing the opening rhythm and the main theme again. The piece ends with an attractive arpeggiated ripple. The rest of the album, tracks 9 through 17, are all dedicated to Héctor Villalobos' set of works, Prol do Bebé, number 2. Prol do Bebé means baby's offspring, I guess, or his toys, or something like that. Anyway, track 9, A Baratinha de Papel, the paper cockroach. And again, I don't speak Portuguese. Please forgive me for any odd pronunciations. This begins rhythmically with a lower theme sounding with the lightly arching rhythm. Villalobos gets into some adventurous harmonic territory here, and of course, fortissimo dynamics at times. The ostinato opening rhythm is almost always present. The piece ends with an aggressive set of 3 hammered out chords. Track 10, A Gatinha de Papelão, the cardboard kitten, starts with a repeating 2-note pattern with some damper pedal saturation. Chords come in with some harmonic color, as is Villalobos' way. The piece wanders a bit harmonically. That ostinato syncopated 2-note pattern returns throughout the piece. Thundering bass appears at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I like the abstractness of this piece, and I got to give you an example of that thundering bass, because as I promised earlier, here we go. final note is held for a long time. It's probably written under a fermata. Track 11, O Camundongo de Masa, or the Dough Mouse. Dough meaning the stuff you make bread with. Scampering bass line with some wild harmony on top. Let's listen to this. You get 3 blind mice there at the end. Pretty interesting. The piece changes its melodic material quickly. There's a kind of song-like fanfare that follows the opening, followed by gonging bell effects in the chords, and a sort of folk dance at the 1 minute mark. The piece reaches a peak crescendo at about the 2 minute mark, where cascading bell patterns in the right hand accompany thundering left hand chords. Yes, Villalobos brings the thunder when he's writing for the piano. The scampering pattern of the opening returns at the end. Track 12, O Cachorrinho de Borracha, the Rubber Puppy. This has a colorful harmony in the somber opening chords. The heavy chords give the rhythm a sort of lumbering quality. A gradual crescendo occurs as slow polyrhythmic patterns emerge. At the peak, there's a cascading figure coming down the piano scale, leading to a gentle repeat of the opening theme. I think that's the dog barking at the end with the harsh fortissimo chords. It's a really cute effect. Track 13, O Cavalinho de Pau, the Hobby Horse. Hobby horses have been characterized in music often before. Think of a Schumann in his Kindersehnen. There's a piece that has the child on a hobby horse. And we get that jaunty rocking motion at the beginning, but the harmony is pretty adventurous and the dynamic is loud. There's a kind of recklessness to this piece that indicates the child may not be all that well behaved on the horse. Let's hear a sample. With all those polyrhythms in there, this sounds like this is going to be a really tough piece to play. At the 1 minute and 30 second mark, a crazed sort of folk dance rhythm breaks out with odd color harmonies on the melody. By 2 minutes and 24 seconds, we've reached that Villalobos fortissimo, and the piano is pure thunder. The piece ends with a sudden flourish and a garumphing rolled bass. Track 14, O Boizinho de Chumbo, the Lead Ox. A repeating staccato bass note accompanies the attractive syncopated melody. Let's hear this. And as you heard, the music gets a bit unruly by the 40-second mark. We heard that right there. The kid being depicted in these pieces wouldn't last long in my house, I can tell you that. At 2 minutes and 35 seconds, a syncopated rhythm starts and it's appealing, but it doesn't stick around for long. It's interrupted by another theme that crescendos to fortissimo. The piece gradually decrescendos to the end, where repeating material eventually drifts apart. Track 15, O Passarinho de Pano, The Cloth Bird. The opening trill has a chirping quality to it to indicate the bird. The theme is played in the piano's highest range. There are polyrhythmic lines in this opening, as though many birds are chirping at the same time. It's not quite reminiscent of Messiaen, though. There are some nice ornamented patterns up in the high end leading up to notes. A syncopated rhythm breaks out at 1 minute and 32 seconds, but again quickly disappears, leading to a slower, repeating chord pattern with a more modest dynamic. We hear the chirping birds of the piano's high end in the right hand. At the 3 minute and 15 seconds, there's an explosive bass note with bird-like patterns in the right hand, bringing the piece to an end as they slow down. Track 16, O Ursinho de Algodão, the Cotton Teddy Bear. Rolled chords in a rhythm that sounds like a creature clumsily strolling down the road opens this piece. It's kind of cute. Let's hear it. There's an aggressive rhythmic passage at 1 minute and 10 seconds that accompanies the equally aggressive theme in this section. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, there's a melodic theme that's pretty appealing if you pull it out of its fortissimo dynamic. The piece ends at that forte dynamic. And track 17, the final track, O Lobozinho de Vidro, the Little Glass Wolf. Well, listeners, I hope you weren't trying to fall asleep while listening to this album, because this particular movement would just wake the entire neighborhood if it's played loud enough. Rapidly repeating notes build up to a fortissimo, from which a theme breaks out of, with other rhythms accompanying. Most of this piece is fortissimo or more, and that repeated note constantly returns after thundering chord patterns pass. At 3 minutes and 45 seconds, there's a bit of respite as a stalking rhythm appears in the bass and ends in cascading notes in the high end. This entire piece seems to be played at fortissimo and above, and it's a credit to Caetano's stamina that he keeps the piece moving for the entire 5 minutes. So the program is entirely made up of short movements, even in the Mignone Piano Sonata. I should say, this is basically an album of Villa-Lobos compositions with other composers added. So much time is reserved for Brazil's most famous composer. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of Villa-Lobos' piano music, but Diego Caetano makes a good case for it here. He pulled out a lot of the really appealing, little jokey parts of it, and I was a bit more attracted to it than I usually am. He brings incredible energy to the Prol de Bébé pieces, tirelessly hammering out passages that are marked fortissimo and beyond. He recognizes the humor in the pieces and throws himself into the more energetic passages with great passion. The rest of the music on the album plays heavily on rhythm, but not necessarily the ones you associate with Brazilian music through samba and bossa nova, for example. The Nyatali piece that opens the album was the most appealing to me, with its jazzy, improvisational elements. It was mostly a new world of piano discovery for me, and I expect it would be the same for most listeners.
It's an interesting program with a lot of variety. Other than the Villa-Lobos, I wasn't very familiar with these composers, and mostly I've listened to Villa-Lobos' guitar works. I enjoyed the Suite Florale a lot and sensed the French influence in the harmonies right away. The Prol del Bébé is rather delirious and histrionic in comparison most of the way through. The Natali is jazzy and rhythmically Brazilian at the same time. I enjoyed that as well. And the Mignone is mercurial and constantly brings new ideas and techniques with each movement. I like the harmonies in the Guarnieri and the extended melodic ideas that seem to stretch out. Impressive performances by Caetano, showing a wide range of expression and, as you mentioned, endurance through the program.
Yeah, impressive performance by Diego Caetano throughout the album. All right, our final classical album of the night as we travel south of the border. Music from the Americas 1. Venezuela.
All right.
I'm saying it that way because there's an exclamation point at the end of Venezuela. So the album is not called Venezuela, it's called Venezuela. This is by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Domingo Hindoyan, and it's on the Onyx label, and it was released on October 25th. Now, that's pretty recent. It's only a month ago, and Presto Music in England, who I check up on often, they've just listed their 100 best classical albums of the year, and this is on it.
Oh.
And it just came out.
Wow.
So I guess somebody listened to it and said, yeah, this is good, put it on. I thought so too. Now for us, I wanted to listen to this because we heard Domingo Hindoyan conduct the Liverpool Philharmonic on a recording of the Puerto Rican composer Roberto Sierra's orchestral works,
Right.
which included his Sixth Symphony on our episode 121, A Trans-Musical Experience, on July 3rd, 2023. Now, Hindoyan is embarking on a musical tour of South America with this first in a promised series of releases. Hindoyan himself is Venezuelan, so he begins there. The booklet note writer Carlos Calderon Urestieta, I hope I said that close to correctly, whose writing is translated here by Robert Sargant, interestingly presents the program here as a journey, which implies coming into contact with the new. And that's exactly what we do on this album. A journey is an invitation to amass experiences and to broaden our expectations, he says. His notes are rather poetic, and I'll quote from them as we talk about each track. All of the works on the album are examples of musical nationalism. And I have to say something about this. Nationalism has become kind of a bad word these days, but musical nationalism is something that's attractive for the whole world. It really shows the most appealing qualities often of a culture in the music, and it makes us all really want to go there. So music is really something that, after food, music is something that can attract us to certain cultures. This is an album of 6 orchestral works, all of them in one movement. The first piece, track 1, by Juan Bautista Plaza, who lived 1898 to 1965, is called Vigilia, Poema Sinfónico. It's inspired by a poem by Juan Ramón Jiménez written in 1928 about someone who can't sleep due to some kind of ecstasy or anxiety, or maybe both. It starts with a lonely reed line and atmospheric strings. The piece is impressionistic and gentle at the opening. It has a languorous feel, a bit like Debussy's Prélude à l'après-midi d'enfant, and one can imagine the Venezuelan sunshine beating down and giving this piece its languor. The crescendo, up to 1 minute and 24 seconds, sounds like daybreak, but the music quickly subsides and we hear a lonely oboe melody. I think that's an oboe. Strings take over in the second minute with an impressionistically harmonized melody, and I'm going to sample that. Man, it's just that lush orchestration. Yeah. I just want to keep going. And in fact, this was an easy piece to listen to the entire 13 minutes of. Another big crescendo doesn't quite reach its peak in the 4th minute, and we're back to lonely wind instruments. The theme changes at around the 4 minute and 50-second mark. A slow, dotted melody at 5 minutes and 27 seconds caught my ear for its character. The piece is reed heavy. We hear more after this section. There are occasional quick crescendos that just as quickly subside, but the one just before the 7th minute stays mezzo forte and builds again. It sounds a bit agitated at this point, but the beauty of the orchestration remains throughout. At 9 minutes and 35 seconds, there's a big crescendo to the work's peak, and again it quickly subsides into quieter, impressionistic themes, heavy in the woodwinds. The floating dotted rhythm is back at the 10 minute and 30 second mark, giving the strings a ghostly, gliding feel. The piece comes to a twinkling ending. Hindoyan and the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic put this highly impressionistic piece across beautifully, with gorgeous tone and balance to the sensuous timbral combinations in the work. If you liked that sample that I played, you're going to love this entire work. It's really beautiful and sensuous too. Track 2, Evencio Castellanos, 1915 to 1984. This is his Santa Cruz de Pacairigua, a suite sinfonica. Now we're going to hear this composer twice on this album. The Pacairigua in the title is a river at the foot of the mountains with the sea on the other side. Here, the descendants of former slaves still maintain the colonial traditions which Castellanos set to music in 1954, which is this piece that we're hearing here. The people dancing to the rhythm of the drum in front of the Church of the Holy Cross and carrying the statue of St. Peter. Bells are heard and snatches of waltzes. With the onset of night, the frenzy of the fiesta returns. That part is from the booklet note. As you can hear, it's very poetic. So in this piece, a fanfare is heard in a muted trumpet. Percussion hammers up front. The piece is given a Latin rhythm. Then there's a pause and chiming percussion come in, accompanying the Latin-sounding melody in the oboe. There are a lot of quick changes in the movement, reminiscent of Stravinsky's Petrushka. Material doesn't stick around for long. After this, there's scurrying material leading to a climax. As it goes, we hear other material as though we're passing scenes while sailing on a river. So that kind of reminded me of the way Ma Vlast or the Moldau by Smetana is structured. The orchestration in this piece again is beautifully realized. The orchestration itself is inventive at times, with trilling flutes and piccolos adding texture in the 5th minute. At 5 minutes and 42 seconds, a sudden climax is reached, and the music suddenly quietens to a tranquil, star-filled night kind of sound. A more romantic theme comes along at the 7-minute mark. A pizzicato rhythmic theme starts at around 8 minutes and 30 seconds, and we hear a more dancing rhythm after that, and I'm going to sample that dancing rhythm. And once again, just gorgeous orchestration. From the sample, you can get a sense of the orchestration and of how suddenly the material changes. We heard one change there. At the 10-minute mark, there's a saturated string theme with a flute singing along briefly at the end. At 11 minutes and 54 seconds, percussion hammer out an aggressive syncopated dance rhythm. There's even a gong heard in the 12th minute. Let's hear a bit of the partying at the end of the piece, which I also enjoyed. Actually, I enjoyed this piece all the way through, but let's hear the ending. Yeah, that's how you end an orchestral piece. Track 3, Inocente Carreño, 1919 to 2016, Margariteña, Glossa Sinfónica. Margarita is an island. Carreño was inspired by a popular song that describes Margarita as a teardrop turned into a pearl. The opening motif is heard in the distance and soon turns into a fanfare. New songs follow. The opening horn call has a sense of distance but very present on the recording. In the 2nd minute, a clear theme emerges in the cello, there's a build-up, and we hear the big boned theme full blast. Let's hear that. A bird-like theme descends from the flutes through the wind section to the bassoons. It's a nice effect, going down the orchestra and changing its timbre. At 4 minutes and 26 seconds, a new theme with a slow chugging rhythm begins and rises in harmony, while it crescendos to a climax at around 5 minutes and 40 seconds. A dance rhythm takes over with a bit of a chug to it as well. In the 8th minute, the dancing ceases and a more emphatic theme comes to the fore. It moves to pianissimo and the music stills. The piece actually sounds like it's ending in the 9th minute with a sustained tonic chord, but when it lets go, a light dancing theme comes up. It's interrupted by loud repeated notes in the brass. This becomes a motive that's repeated in various instruments. A mighty chord sequence follows with splashy percussion and emphatic string melody in the 11th minute. The piece has a splashy fortissimo rhythmic ending. Track 4. Evencio Castellanos. We actually heard his piece in track 2 as well. This one's called El Río de las Siete Estrellas, Poema Sinfónico. The title refers to the Orinoco River, the River of the Seven Stars. A river so wide that you can't see the bank on the other side. Its majestic flow inspired the poet Andrés Eloy Blanco to tell the country's history by way of 7 stars: the lament of the Indian, conquest and the arrival of Christianity, the emerging republic, defeat, more war, nights of delirium, and following a war of the worlds, the longed-for freedom. This piece was written in 1946, and those comments come from the booklet note. In this piece, a long flute plays a plaintive opening theme. The string harmony is impressionistic with the lightest of sound as the theme passes through the wind section. Castellanos seems to like percussive effects because we hear some gently applied here too. There's a glimmer to the theme that emerges at the minute and 20-second mark, and I just have to sample this. A lot of birds in Venezuela, I think, because they get depicted a lot. A more traditional sounding dance rhythm comes up at the 2 minute and 20-second mark and quickly fades into more impressionistic material. Castellanos likes to paint passing scenes in his music, and this work moves from theme to theme, much like the previous piece of his we heard in track 2, Santa Cruz de Pacairigua. At 4 minutes, there's a full pause after the tonic chord, and the opening flute comes back in for a repeat of that melody. But it's rather rudely interrupted by chaotic themes in the orchestra, sounding like the confusion of a festival. A more aggressive section follows, with outbursts from the orchestra. A contrasting quiet episode is heard at 7 minutes and 43 seconds, which in turn is interrupted by a distant and approaching march theme. There are quick changes to the rhythm from here. The technique of sudden textural changes from Stravinsky's Petrushka are evident here, as in the previous Castellanos work. By the 10th minute, we're hearing triumphant brass harmonies. The piece comes to a big splashy ending on a driving rhythm. Track 5, Antonio Estevez, 1916 to 1988, Melodia en el Llano, a glimpse of the Venezuelan plains. Estevez himself was a plainsman, and here he has written a musical depiction of the horizon at midday and the imposing sense of immovability and heat. I think a lot of the music we've heard on this album depicts that, in fact. Given the theme of heat, the opening is quiet and evokes the wavering air we see in a hot place. The piece moves slowly and deliberately. In the 3rd minute, a more rhythmic figure breaks through the heat. Oh, and I just missed that big burst of sunshine at the end of that. A spacious crescendo is briefly reached, and I faded out on it, but settles into a light rhythm with flowing legato theme over it. As the piece nears its end, it settles into a nighttime-like twinkling orchestration and reaches a soothing final chord. Track 6, Yuri Hung, born in 1968. This is a contemporary composer. Canaima is the name of the piece. Canaima is at the source of the Orinoco River, I'm guessing by the booklet note. This work was written in 2004, and the rhythm never ceases in this piece. The sound of rainfall takes us to the end of the piece. It's probably the most heavily rhythmic piece on the album, and it starts with percussive effects, including pizzicato from the strings. Various themes with high rhythmic profiles overlap over the constant percussion underneath. I'm going to join this at about the 2-minute mark when it's all really up to speed. All right, I wanted to get those quiet pizzicato in there. Hope everybody could hear that. The percussion briefly disappears after the 2-minute and 30-second mark, but the rhythmic impetus is still felt. The percussion comes back more heavily once we're in the 3rd minute. The piece itself ends with the light percussion, and the last sound we hear is a rain stick. If you're looking for a way to discover Venezuelan music, this album provides an ideal entry point for it. Hindoyan has a genuine feel for this music, and he draws it out of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic well. I had some reservations about the lack of groove to the rhythm on the Sierra recording last year, but here the rhythm is greatly improved. You can tell Hindoyan has a deep commitment to the program. A lot of the music on the program morphs from theme to theme quickly. It's as though the composers want to showcase all of the musical complexity of their culture. That said, the music is all light and immediately understandable and enjoyable. There are a lot of pleasures to be had in various elements of the music, timbral combinations, rhythmic harmony, and melody. For me, the contemporary work Canaima by Yuri Hung was the most exciting, and its constant rhythms driving the 5-minute piece. This is as appealing an introduction to any culture's music as you'll get. I have to say, though, listening to this album straight through is a bit daunting, despite the immediate appeal of all of the music. All of the pieces feature quick changes of texture, so it can feel like you're being hit with new contrasts for each minute of the 66-minute running time. And by the end, one can feel like one has gained 100 years of experience in an hour. It's probably better to listen to the album in parts, maybe 2 or 3 tracks at a time. The music of Venezuela is multifaceted, and it's a great discovery. It's good to have this music on an album, and I also want to say, South America has so many musical riches, not just in popular music and dance music either, but also in classical music. And we, in the United States, and even less so in Europe, don't get to hear enough of it. And I'm really glad this recording is out there, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of this series.
I didn't know what to expect before listening, and I was surprised by how easily enjoyable this was right away. Especially the woodwind parts in the Plaza, Castellanos, and Estevez were outstanding. The Castellanos works were dynamic and positively explosive. The Correño was exciting too. And the Hung, the last piece, was quite different in character, more rhythmic with a lot of percussion. Great melodies and themes throughout these works connected to the history and geography of Venezuela. A captivating performance by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Domingo Hindoyan, and great sonics from Onyx here too. This will really fill up your room with huge, enjoyable sound. I can say I'm looking forward to the rest of this series.
Yeah, I may have to pick this one up. I really liked it. And just to have it as like sort of a reference point. I didn't know any of these composers or any of this music, and it was a real discovery. Really enjoy it. I'm glad it's out there.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll have a box set of all of these when the series is done too.
That could be years from now, and we're not getting any younger.
That is true. All right, over on the jazz side of the program, I've got some interesting, unique choices for this episode. We're going to start out in France with a cordless trombone trio. Cordless ensembles are all the rage these days. Mike, we've heard a few of them, but we haven't heard any with trombone yet. So I said, let's do it.
No, you should probably mention that by cordless, you mean that there's no instrument that can play chords on it, like a piano.
That's right. We're not talking about something with a battery pack that you plug in and charge up like your razor or your drill.
I always get that image in my head when you say that.
Right. So we're talking about no instrument playing chords, which we would normally hear in jazz as a piano or a guitar. We've heard a lot of these recordings with saxophone and trumpet recently, but no trombone. And I thought, well, let's try out a trombone trio. This is called Oko on Uqbar Records from trombonist Fidel Fourneyron. Born in southwestern France, Fidel Fourneyron moved to Paris in 2006 to study jazz and improvised music at the conservatory. There he met people that he would make future collaborations with, including the Coax and Umlaut collectives, Les Vibrants des Fichures, and Les Tricoletifs. Fourneyron has played in swing orchestras, and he's a soloist in the Umlaut Big Band, which specializes in 1920s and 30s dance music. Un Poco Loco, the trio he is part of, revisits 1950s standards, so he seems to be a versatile musician. And here is something even more unique, a project focusing on ideas from the African Yoruba tradition. From the album notes, Oko is the Orisha, a manifestation of the supreme creator god invoked by the Yoruba to ask for prodigality, abundance, and fertility. Fidel Fourneyron has chosen the study of the Yoruba pantheon, whose vibrancy in the Afro-Caribbean diaspora is the source of incredible musical creativity, as the axis for nourishing his imagination and continuing to develop the aesthetic of a return to the roots of jazz. Born of the encounter between melodic and rhythmic traditions wrested from Africa and European harmonic language, jazz, for Fidel Fourneyron, draws its essential strength from its African roots. The idea behind this new trio is to continue in a small group the work begun in a large ensemble with Kevola, then Benge, music that takes melody and its rhythmic underpinnings as the starting point for collective play. In this uncluttered trio with no polyphonic instruments, everything is based on the encounter between drumming and singing, while allowing themselves harmonic and formal perspectives drawn from contemporary European music. The group draws its strength from digging into the earth. Are you ready now?
Oh, yeah.
So just a trio here, Fidel Fourneyron on trombone, Thibaud Soulas on bass, and Antoine Paganotti on the drums. Now, myself, not knowing much about the Yoruba tradition, I tried to do a little bit of studying to get some background on what the titles mean as well. The recording is going to start out with Aja, the Orisha of the whirlwind forest, the animals within it, and herbal medicine. This has a 16-measure melody made up of repeating 4-measure syncopated phrases in unison on trombone and bass. Soulas goes on from that, establishing an ostinato, and Fourneyron joins back in with improvisations. Let's hear this recording get started. Well, he gets into some snappy trombone riffs before taking a break and then comes back for more improvisations. I'm really getting into this groove.
Yeah, it's kind of like got a spy movie kind of bass there.
Yeah.
Really dug it.
So let's come back in and hear a little bit more of what he has to say on the trombone. Yeah, it's rhythmic and kind of hypnotic with some tricky slide work going on. The riffy idea locked in with bass comes back before a return to the opening melody to end it. Track 2 is just called Indians. Paganotti gets things started on this one. The first section of the melody is riffy, then a new riffy section comes along. At about a minute, a new section with lifting melodic lines follows. Let's hear it up until some of that changing section. There's that new happy section coming in. The original riffy section returns, and then Soulas gets an improvised solo with a lot of bounce. Let's check out a little bit of that. Fourneyron is back from there with playful improvisations over the lifting melody section. A final section of the riffy melody finishes up the tune. Track 3, Inle. Inle is the Orisha of health and all medicinal healing in Santeria and also in Candomblé and Palo Mayombe. Soulas has a cool, busy rhythmic bass octave thing going to start this one. The trombone melody has 8 measure sections in an AABBAACC pattern. Soulas keeps a ringing high pedal tone effect while getting a moving low note bass underneath, which is really neat. Let's hear some of what's going on. Fourneyron continues on with improvisations, getting softer, and the bass and drums carry on with an outro like the beginning. Track 4, Algo Nuevo, something new in Spanish. This is a happy calypso-sounding tune. It seems to be based around 2 8-measure sections of a comparatively static alternating chord pattern, and then a more contrasting section. Fourneyron works a melody section over each pattern and then moves into improvisations. Let's hear it. Paganotti gets to work up the drums for a transition before Fourneyron returns with more happy song-like improvisations and then connects back to some original melody ideas. Track 5, Babalu Aye, the spirit of the earth and strongly associated with infectious disease and healing. There's a lot of intricate, subdivided, and syncopated rhythmic play between the trio on this construction. The repeating phrase is in a 12-beat pattern. Fourneyron alternates between higher and softer lower phrases before moving into improvisations. Soulas has a bass solo section and Fourneyron has a really playful solo. Let's hear some of that on this tune. They take it down softer with the drums dropping out almost completely. Bass and trombone keep the rhythmic but more legato push going to the end. Track 6, Iroko, a hardwood tree from the west coast of Africa. This one has a unique 5-beat pattern with bass and drums locking in on a repeating rising figure. Fourneyron lays more flowing legato lines on top. A contrasting section with a fast and busy 8-beat feel comes in before it returns to the previous groove. rhythmic changes are ahead, Soulas gets some bass play in. Let's hear a bit of that and how it sort of hangs and sticks on a snare roll from Paganotti. Fourneyron returns there with improvisations, and things get free-flowing before the original 5-beat pattern returns in the bass and drums, and Fourneyron tapers off to single-note ideas. Track 7, Oba, a ruler or monarch in the Yoruba language. This has a super busy trombone part with a lot of repeated notes and intervals that will give Fourneyron a tonguing workout. Let's hear this one get going. As you hear there are some more chromatic harmonic ideas that come in. It finishes with a couple snappy trombone phrases, and it's the shortest tune on the recording at just 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Track 8, Oshalufang. Oshala, known as Orishala or Orishi Nra in Africa, is a prominent Orisha associated with creation. Oshaguyan, the young warrior, and Oshalufan is the older, more patient form. This is a slower tune with a longer note trombone melody. It feels in 3 beats and has some bass movement underneath with pickup lines into new phrases. Soulas gets some ringing bass into singing trombone improvisations from Fourneyron. Let's hear some of that as well. Fourneyron continues on, bringing back a phrase of the original melody to a bluesy ending with a little lip harmonic in his tone. Track 9, Agwe, which is a Loa, a spirit who rules over the sea in Haiti. A rhythmic pentatonic trombone melody starts it out in a 3-beat pattern. Bass and drums join in, and there are some unexpected modulations coming along. On improvisations, and the rhythmic feel evolves in interesting ways. Bass and drums get to work up a section before Fourneyron returns with some of the original melody idea into a fun rhythmic lick ending. And the final track is Oduduwa, a Yoruba divine king, legendary founder of the Ife Empire and a creator deity, Orisha, in the Yoruba religion. This one is syncopated and celebratory, starting out with a bluesy bass line and drum intro. The trombone melody is rhythmic and playful. Improvisations have some exuberant cries, so let's join in for one more sample. Soulas gets some bouncy bass solo time too before Fourneyron is back to wrap up the recording. A cordless trombone trio with an elemental approach. The focus here is on rhythm, and there are a lot of interesting syncopated and complex rhythmic elements and variety in the songs. The song titles and melodies too, I presume, have connection to the Yoruba tradition, and Fourneyron, Soulas, and Paganotti use these to springboard into improvisations with a lot of spontaneous interplay. Fourneyron is in the spotlight, and his chops hold up through long sections, showing dexterity and flexibility in the often busy lines. Soulas impresses with a lot of bouncy and busy bass lines too, and Paganotti gets tight with all the rhythmic change-ups and intricacies that are going on. It's something different, enjoyable, and takes us on a journey back to some of the roots of jazz and other styles of music in the African Yoruba tradition.
Yeah, when you say the roots of jazz, I kind of thought of New Orleans in a lot of this.
Sure.
And not like really New Orleans jazz, but more like the Mardi Gras type thing. And I think that goes back to the Yoruba tradition, which I have to confess I don't know enough about, although it really intrigues me. This album is full of like intriguing rhythms like that. It's, yeah, like you said, it's a really rhythmic album. The grooves are reminiscent to me of Caribbean dances, and I guess really New Orleans sort of.
Sure.
The bass playing is groovy throughout the album. The drums set grooves that grab the ear and the body at the beginning of virtually each track, and I kind of enjoyed that element of this album too. Fidel Fourneyron on the trombone has a mostly breathy tone, and he keeps his playing at a modest dynamic, which I kind of liked. He grooved in his solos along with the rhythm section. The trio keeps their cordless approach tied to, I guess, popular dance. When I say popular, I don't mean, I guess, traditional popular, not like, of today. It made for an energetic, compelling album that really intrigued me. And you said these guys are French?
Yeah.
Because they may as well be Cajun or something. I don't know. They sound like that, though. I mean, that was the vibe I got from the record. I really enjoyed it.
Well, after all those African rhythms, we're going drumless for the rest of the program, Mike.
Cordless, drumless.
Cordless and drumless. We're going to move on with a guitar recording from guitarist John Hart on Steeplechase Records' Love Is. It came out November 8th. John Hart was born in 1951 in Virginia. Since arriving in New York in 1984, he performed and or recorded with organist Jack McDuff for 16 years, Ted Masahino, Jimmy Smith, and Lou Donaldson, Chris Potter in his 1992 John Hart Quartet, and he was a member of the Maria Schneider Orchestra. He's a lecturer at the University of Miami Frost School of Music, and being in New York for many years, he's one of the most prolific and versatile guitarists out there in the jazz scene. He released CDs as a band leader on such labels as Blue Note and Concord, Index as well, and he's appeared on over 100 CDs as a sideman, and I think this is his 6th recording on Steeplechase to date. We heard him back in episode 129, Metal Melodies, back in August of 2023. That was his recording Resonance, also on Steeplechase. That was a quartet with Brian Charette on organ, and we had sax on there too. And here on this recording, we're going to have a special trio, guitar, cornet, from a cornetist we really like, Kirk Knufke. And we just listened to him recently back in August. That was in episode 178, Trumpet Divertimento. And he's recording Super Blonde, also on Steeplechase. That really knocked us out. And also to round out the trio, we've got Carlo De Rosa on bass. Got a nice mixture in the program here, beginning with a Bud Powell tune, Hallucination. I'm not sure about the original release for this recording, but you can find it on 1956's The Genius of Bud Powell, that's made up of recordings taken from 1949 to 1951. This is a fun boppy tune. It's in an AABA shape with an extended final ending and solo break. Knufke and Hart take the melody together in unison, and Hart is up first out of the break for a solo. Let's hear it get going. DeRosa's bass has a great bounce, and Hart is really swinging along with snappy rhythms for his well-connected melodic ideas. He has fun double stops and bent notes along the way. Let's come back in for some of Kanufki's solo on this tune. That's some playful phrasing and fun ideas, and he has a lot more to go. Hart and Kanufki trade fours and then twos, working up to simultaneous improvisations back into the melody one more time. Track 2 is a John Hart original, Infamy. Here's a tricky tune. It gets underway with a 6-beat ostinato in the bass and guitar. Assuming it's written in a 6/4 meter, the melody has 4 measures of 6/4, then switches to 2 measures of 4/4, and then back to 2 of 6 before repeating. Guitar and cornet work the lines together with some tense harmonies, creating an ominous feel. It has a bluesiness going to the 4 chord in the progression. Hart goes into the first solo with DeRosa walking out a straight 4/4 12-bar blues progression. Let's check it out. Let's come back in and hear some more of Hart's playful solo. Interesting ending there. And Kanufki's solo meanders around the blues with speedy lines. All three do some trading fours, getting DeRosa in on the action before the ostinato is back to bring in the melody that goes to some final phrase repeats before the ending. Track 3, Billy Strayhorn's A Flower is a Lovesome Thing, first recorded by Duke Ellington and his orchestra back in 1946. A warm-toned rubato solo guitar opening from Hart gets this started before Kanufki joins in and DeRosa brings some bowed bass underneath. Let's enjoy this nice sound. bowed bass sounds really nice. After 2 minutes, De Rosa switches up to plucking with a soft bass pulse. Not having drums really makes this have a magical free space to it. Let's hear some of Hart's improvisations here with smooth lines that float above the bass pulse. There was a really tasty bend in there, too. Knufke is soft and thoughtful, building up from phrases of shorter ideas and getting soft again to bring in a solo from De Rosa. Knufke is back from the melody B section, and the ending is really lovely. Geez, I wish we could just take more and more samples. There's so many nice things to listen to in this tune. Be sure to check out this whole tune by yourself. Track 4 is the title track, Love Is. This is a neat little minor tune. After a 4-measure intro, the melody is in an AABA shape with a kind of fun coda ending. The sections have an interesting contrast of easy-flowing melody lines and speedy double-time phrases. The B section and ending have some tricky syncopated phrases. All that's handled with no sweat in unison by Hart and Knufke. Just a guess, but I wonder if that contrast is representing the two natures of love, warm and fuzzy, and then frantic and crazy.
No, it's a nice thought. Hart's up first, from there with a tasty solo with lots of snappy double-time licks and some bluesy nuggets. Knufke has lots of double-time licks and constantly inventive phrasing and techniques, but it's time to check out a bass solo from De Rosa on this one.
From there, they all do some trading fours before another run through the melody. Track 5 is Blue and Green from 1959's Kind of Blue. Miles Davis, of course. There seems to be some controversy over authorship between Miles Davis and Bill Evans on this tune. Here it's credited to Bill Evans. Most jazz fans will know this from the famous Kind of Blue album. It was slow and brooding. Here it's reimagined in a 5/4 time signature with a bouncy bass and guitar ostinato to get things started before Knufke takes the melody. DeRosa gets the first solo here, working up high with melodic ideas. Let's check out Knufke's solo on this tune. Very nice. Hart's solo starts out working off from the ostinato phrase idea, and he brings the rhythmic idea back in again before working into more speedy lines. The ostinato brings Knufke back with the final melody section. Track 6 is Pee-wee, a tune by Tony Williams from Miles Davis's 1967 recording The Sorcerer. An easy flowing waltz feel here, just like the original. Hart gets it started on the first phrase before Knufke joins in. Knufke carries on with improvisations after the melody, and Hart follows. They join up for the melody again. It's the shortest tune on the recording at just over 4 minutes. Track 7, another John Hart original, Lazy Thirds. This one starts in a halftime feel, then the bass gets chugging on the repeat underneath. If you think of it at the double time tempo, it's basically an AABA shape with an extra 2 measures at the end. Hart launches into a solo right after the melody. Things keep chugging for the solos, and Knufke and DeRosa have solos as well. The bass solo gets some backing lines from the melody from guitar and cornet. Let's check out the ending of this tune with some of the bass solo. DeRosa drops out for the start of the melody and saves the walking for the last section. Knufke gets the last word on the ending. Track 8, Never Let Me Go, Jay Livingston and Ray Evans. Nat King Cole released this in 1956. It's a standard jazz ballad. They give it a 4-measure intro. Hart takes the pretty 28-measure melody, and Knufke plays tasty accompanying ideas. Let's check out some of Knufke's improvised solo on this one as well. Nice melodic ideas. Hart follows, and DeRosa keeps an engaging pace below him. Then DeRosa has a melodic bass solo with soft but accurate articulation. Hart is back with the second half of the melody with a little extended ending to a slowdown, with Knufke adding improvised lines. Track 9, Be My Love, by Nicholas Brodsky, first recorded by Billy Eckstein in 1950 with lyrics from Sammy Kahn. Let's hear Hart's rubato solo opening into a bouncy bass line, bringing in Kanufki on the melody. Who needs drums anyway? This tune has a little longer than usual 36-measure construction. Kanufki has a jubilant solo first, and then Hart takes over with a great sense of swing over DeRosa's walking bass. And how about a high melodic bass solo from DeRosa on this one? All three trade eights after that before Kanufki takes a final time leading through the melody. And the recording ends up with track 10, I Thought About You by Jimmy Van Heusen, first recorded by Dinah Shore in 1939 with lyrics by Johnny Mercer. A good old standard with a 32-measure melody. It has similar halves with different endings. DeRosa's relaxed walking bass underneath has Hart taking the first half and Kanufki taking over with a gentle lyrical sound. Let's check out the melody. Hart solos first, so let's hear some of his solo on this final tune. seamless flowing lines, mixing in chords easily and melodic and playful ideas. DeRosa follows with a busy but quiet bass solo that makes you lean in while Hart works soft chords, and Konofsky chains fun phrases together, leaving you hanging in little pauses. They get back to the melody, Konofsky taking the first half this time and Hart the latter, and continue on for a few minutes of improvised interplay before a chordy ending from Hart. Last time we heard John Hart, it was in an organ trio setting with Brian Charette and Rich Perry on sax, and we enjoyed that recording a lot. Here we get something just as enjoyable but more intimate. The drumless trio leaves a lot of space for subtle expression, and the interplay is great. The program is a nice balance of favorite jazz standards, compositions by jazz greats Bud Powell, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, and Tony Williams. The 5/4 reimagination of Blue and Green was very interesting, and Hart's original tunes are unique with the changing meters of Infamy and the split personalities of the title track Love Is. Hart's sound is warm and fluid, with every improvised solo full of ideas. We get to hear Kirk Konofsky on more standard material than his recent Super Blonde, and he shines with playful inventiveness. And Carlo DeRosa carries the rhythms with gentle pulses and walking bass lines, also showing off a fine melodic sense in his own improvised solos. A really enjoyable recording that draws you in and keeps you satisfied with great melodies and creativity.
Yeah, this seems to be the intimate episode. We had an intimate classical album, too. On this album, I liked the variety. And for me, the absence of drums gave the overall sound a softer vibe. It kind of had it was a groove, but it was more like suggested than stated.
Right.
And that also comes from Konofsky, who plays with a really mellow tone that I really enjoy. I mean, I liked it on his album Super Blonde, too. He's generally a melodic player with really good ideas. I really like listening to him. But sometimes he'll surprise with some technique here. We didn't hear too much of that on Super Blonde. He was more about his tone, I think, on that album. He's got good taste in all the musical styles on the album and shows his creativity often by changing his approach mid-solo. Carlo DeRosa sounds like an equal partner in this trio, getting ample opportunity to solo and sounding impressive and always musical when he does. That's not always the case with bass players. Because sometimes they can just kind of thump away, but he's got great melodic ideas. He can get some speed on those solos, too. There were a few solos that really raced. And the music is all lightly played with a real sense of enjoyment and happiness coming from the trio. And that happiness is communicated to us as well. So this album made me feel really good. It's a jazz album that's easy to listen to, but it also gives the intellect something to do, too, in some of the solos with the changes. So, yeah, right up my street. I really love this.
All right, in our last recording, we're going to go to Sweden for saxophonist Elin Forkelid's Songs to Keep You Company on a Dark Night. This is on Sail Cabin Records. It came out November 15th. Born in 1984 in southern Sweden, Elin Forkelid moved to Stockholm at the age of 20 to study saxophone and jazz at the Royal College of Music, and she's been playing on the Swedish jazz scene for 15 years. Her debut album with the Elin Larsson Group, that was her maiden name, was Live and Alive. That goes back to 2009. Her own band, Elin Forkelid Plays for Train, is a quintet that plays interpretations of John Coltrane's music, along with a quartet, Soul Soul, which she leads and composes for together with guitarist David Stakanis. Sail Cabin Records is her own label that she started in order to release her own projects and the freedom that provides. She enjoys composing for various different lineups and focuses on the individualities of the musicians she's composing for at the moment. And she sees her playing now as being between jazz, and free improvisation. The notes say, for this album, I wanted to take a different path. I wanted to explore another side of myself and my artistry. I sometimes think about how every human is full of contradictions. Every personality consists of so many different sides, but sometimes we tend to forget about that and limit ourselves. One thing that every human being has in common, though, is the need for comfort from time to time. I wrote these songs as an attempt to bring a little comfort to whomever may need it. And among the thank yous on the recording notes, she mentions trumpeter-composer Kenny Wheeler for giving her the idea for the recording. All right, the lineup here, Elin Forkelid, tenor, alto, and baritone sax, Tobias Wiklund, cornet and trumpet, How do we manage to get two of our favorite cornet players on one episode?
I know, right?
Just the luck of the draw. Of course, we heard Tobias Wickland's Silver Needle back in episode 67, A Trumpet Tryst, back in June of 2022, and that was one of our best of the year in our 2022 recording list. Also, David Stakkanes on guitar here, Mats Dieming on bass. This was recorded by Carl Gustafsson at Atlantis Metronome in Stockholm in January of this year, mixed by Goran Stegborn and mastered by Stockholm Mastering. The recording is going to get underway with a Forkelid original Music for Four. Stakkanes and Dieming get this started with a 16-measure intro. The bass pulse is sure but gentle. Forkelid and Wickland come in on the melody. Sounds like she's on alto sax here. It's a 24-measure AAB pattern. It has a spacious, delicate beauty to it. Let's listen from where the horns come in a little bit into the tune. Wickland's wavering tone is mysterious, and he continues on with a solo line. His melodic ideas and articulation are distinctive. Forkelid weaves back in with lines intertwining. Their interaction is really the highlight of this tune, so I'd like to hear some more of that. Stakkanes has a relaxed and warm-toned guitar solo, really pearly-sounding notes. The horns add soft backing as he goes on and return to the melody, more intertwining and an extended soft ending with guitar and bass unwinding. It's a lovely start to the recording. Track 2 is Landslide by Stevie Nicks from the self-titled 1975 Fleetwood Mac album. It's not every day that you hear a Fleetwood Mac tune on a jazz album.
They generally don't translate to jazz, I guess. I don't know. They don't do them too often.
Right. But Gen X and older people will remember this melody for sure. Wickland gets to start it out, and Forkelid joins in with some harmony. Let's take a listen. It builds up with a fun, moving sax accompanying line to Wickland's soaring melody. The climax of that line is really lifting. There's no extended improvised section on this tune, so let's hear their melodic collaboration. Softer for a final melody section, led by Forkelid to a slowed ending with a final phrase from Wickland. Track 3, Ytterligheter, which means extremities, another original by Forkelid. An old-time even beat pulse from bass and guitar get it started with an 8-measure intro, and we get treated to Forkelid's bari sax on this one with Wickland's plunger muted horn. It sounds like a 16-measure melody around twice. Staccanos and Wickland continue on with improvised interplay, and Forkelid joins in on the bass line and then joins in the improvised fun, Staccanos adding in some guitar effects. Let's pop back in for some of that a little bit later on. It spirals out into more free playing to a pause before things get restarted with the opening idea into the melody once more with a fun ending to wrap it up. Track 4, Anamoya. This is a Forkelid original. This is a term coined by American author and neologist John Koenig in 2012. His project, The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, aimed to come up with new words for emotions that currently lack words. And this one means nostalgia for a time or place one has never known. And Mike, I think we experience this all the time at Adult Music when we hear these great classical and jazz compositions from days gone by.
Well, I think music does that to you in general, especially like classical music, because it's just from so far in the past, you know.
And this tune is really lovely. An alternating two-note rising bass figure is finished by one note each from the horns, and then Stachanus adds a line in on guitar. The effect is bell-like and hypnotic.
Yeah, it kind of gave me the Satie Gymnopédie kind of feeling, you know. He's got that rhythm.
Let's check it out. Domingo takes the attention shortly thereafter with a bowed bass solo that gets soft horn backing. Ficklin gets a solo next that really soars. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune. There's a big mode change there into a new section with a guitar solo from Stachanus with a more searing rock tone. The horns add backing that builds it up and take it to a gentle ending. Track 5, a Forkelid original, introducing something different here. The horns have fanfare-like phrases introducing something, and these alternate with more retreating-like phrases. Bowed bass underneath stands out, and then things get suddenly free with squawks, squeaks, and muted guitar picks. Let's hear this one get going. This idea continues on for a while until Domingo gets a 5-beat bass ostinato going and more legato horn lines float on top. Forkelid gets a solo here on tenor sax, so let's hear some of her playing. Some of the Coltrane influence showing through there. Viklund joins in with her, and things get more skittering and angsty, like the sounds of swarming bees and spacey guitar tones. After more free exploration, the opening fanfare and answers section returns to end it. Track 6 is Revisiting, another Forkelid original, chilling out now with this tune. It feels like a loping 6/8 meter with a catchy rhythmic guitar riff and soft legato horn lines layered on top. Staccanus continues on with a warm-toned and fluid guitar solo. I'll let it play on for a bit so you can hear some of his great tone. A new section of harmonized horn lines in a contrasting section come in before Staccanus returns to the original riff idea. The horns get some simultaneous interplay as it flows along dreamily. Let's hear some of that as well. We come back to the harmonized lines from before, and then the opening section idea finishes the tune. And the recording ends up with Ida Lupino, who was a British and later American actress. This is a tune by Carla Bley, and this goes back to Paul Bley's 1964 recording Turning Point, which was released around 10 years after it was recorded. And it's also on Carla Bley's 1977 Dinner Music recording. More bari sax for this final tune, and just the horns started out before bass and guitar join in. Let's check it out. let's hear some of Forkelid's Barry sax solo on this tune as well. Some nice wah-wah backing from Wiklund there too. The pulse chills out for some guitar with extra effects from Stackanus. The horn melody with extra wah-wahs builds up strongly and softens over the bass heartbeat that stops before a final warm chord. This was a very unique recording. There's a balance of delicate and intimate melodies with raucous, free improvised sections. Interplay and synergy of the individuals' contributions are more important than solo expression, and the tunes flow through interesting, contrasting sections. This is really a setting to show Forkelid's very personal style of composition. She shares the spotlight generously with Wiklund and Stackanus. She shows a distinctive voice on each of her three saxophones, alto, tenor, and bari. Wiklund's instantly identifiable style shines through, and his solos are a highlight of the recording, and Stackanus has attention-catching solos on guitar with a variety of tones to match the expression he wants for a tune. I really enjoyed this and would like to hear more of Forkelid's composing and playing. Why not keep yourself company on a dark winter night with her tunes?
Yeah, I think she said she wanted this to be soothing, healing. I kind of found it a bit offbeat, which I rather enjoyed, actually. The duetting between Elin Forkelid and Tobias Wiklund throughout the album was fascinating for being, though it's traditional in a lot of ways, unique in tone and approach. And we were just listening to that Ida Lupino track, and I really enjoyed how you had that repeating sort of figure, and then Wiklund came in like in the harmony, like it with this descending line, every third time. It was really, really cool. I really liked just little touches like that are all over the album. In fact, all of the four-man drumless band get involved in this. The album is atmospheric and a bit offbeat, relies on the personalities of the soloists to drive it, and this works well. Each of the musicians on the album has an offbeat personality. They're kind of like the type of people you'd expect to see in a Jim Jarmusch movie, I thought. There's an appealing quirkiness and late-night quiet to the album that makes it really appealing to me, so that's what I got from it.
Really nice atmospheric and spacious tunes and individual playing. Let's hear some more in the future.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. Trios and drumless groups, a little bit different, but next week I'm going to go back to some piano-based music for jazz after doing a few weeks focusing on horns. What do you have in the classical category for next week, Mike?
Yeah, I've got piano or keyboard on all three of my albums. I've got some cello, too. First, we have Hyperion's new release of Boccherini, Music of the Angels, played by Stephen Isserlis, one of our favorite cellists, so that's going to be really enjoyable. I've got Catherine Stott, the pianist's farewell album called Merci, and she's with Yo-Yo Ma on that. They've been performing partners for over 40 years, so this is their final album together. It looks like a set of encores. And then I couldn't resist Nikolai Kapustin's Piano Concertos 2 and 6. This is on the Capriccio label. Of course, we heard Frank Dupree play some of his concertos last year, and I just can't get enough of this. They're all so good, and I really want to hear it.
Over on the jazz side, we're going to hear Gabor Horvat's new trio recording, a Hungarian pianist, Multiverse on Hunia Records. He wrote to me and let me know this was released. Hunia Records sometimes show up on the new release lists, and sometimes they don't. I might have missed this one, so I'm glad he got in touch, and we enjoyed his previous recording, Trick. I'm sure this one's going to be really interesting as well.
Yeah, he is a favorite of the Adult Music Podcast.
Then we're going to hear a new piano trio recording by Ben Patterson, who's equally great on piano and Hammond B3 organ. And this one has got some really nice funky tunes on it, as well as a couple original tunes from him. And then we're going to go to George Cables, a really classy pianist, and his new recording on High Note Records, I Hear Echoes. So 3 piano trios for the jazz section next week in episode 191. All of those recordings will be together on our Deezer playlist, which will be put up a few hours after this episode gets published. So if you want to check that out, go over to Deezer, and there'll also be a link to it from our Facebook. So that wraps it up for episode 190. Thanks as always to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Any final words before we close out, Mike?
Yeah, I just want to wish all the Americans out there a happy Thanksgiving this week. And for the rest of us, I don't know, maybe we're still celebrating St. Cecilia's Day here, so
yeah,
just a happy week. We're full of music.
We'll see you again for episode 191 next week. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.